Welcome to Houston House at South by Southwest, presented by the Greater Houston Partnership. Demystifying the startup journey. Starting a company is no easy feat. It takes courage, creativity, and an unwavering belief in your vision. As any entrepreneur can attest, the road to success is paved with both triumphs and challenges, and there is no one-size-fits-all guidebook to navigate it. Every startup has its own unique path to success, and every founder brings their own perspective and experiences to the table. From building the right team and securing funding, to launching a product and planning for an exit, the startup journey is a wild ride. That's why the insights and knowledge gained from fellow founders are so invaluable. By sharing their stories, experiences, and lessons learned, they can inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs. Join our diverse mix of startup founders as we attempt to demystify the startup journey.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this panel. My name is Natalie Harms. I'm the editor of Innovation Map, and I've got a great group of panelists today to talk about the startup journey, sharing their lessons learned, all of the good stuff. So please stick around. We'll also have some Q&A from the audience at the end. But first, we're going to each introduce ourselves. So like I said, I'm Natalie, editor of Innovation Map, which is an online digital media platform covering tech and startups in Houston. Highly recommend, if you haven't heard of Innovation Map, to go to innovationmap.com, click subscribe, and you'll get all of the news about Houston startups and tech. Okay, and will each of you go down the line and briefly introduce yourself, tell us about your startup, the technology you've created, and what stage you're at. Ted.
Hi, good morning. My name is Ted Gutierrez, Houston native. I spent about a decade as an Army officer traveling the world, but I found myself back in the oil and gas industry as a risk manager. For the better part of the last decade, I've been helping industrial ecosystem enterprises figure out where their cyber risks are comparatively to the different facilities that they own. And I do that with the software as a service company called securitygate.io. We just had our 6th year anniversary. We've transitioned from bank loans to founder money to bootstrapped up to seed and angel, and then raised our first institutional round right during the middle of COVID, right? And so had a really great transition between all the different stages of growth for the company. Super excited about any sort of startup or founder who's interested in going from an idea to really scalable revenue in those early stages. Really a pleasure to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Simone May. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Clutch. We're a digital marketplace where we connect the next generation of creators to emerging brands looking for digital marketing support. So I always like to give the use case. If you are an established or emerging brand looking to increase engagement or maintain engagement on your social media platforms, we have the creators that can authentically connect to whatever audience you're trying to serve. A little bit about me, I started this company with my best friend from college. We both met at Purdue University. I was studying computer science and she was studying accounting and finance, which made for a good match when it comes to starting a tech company, I think. We closed our pre-seed round this past year at 2 million, and we're currently raising a seed round at 3.
Good morning. My name is Gaurav Khandelwal. I'm founder CEO of Velostix. Think of Velostix just like you would think of OpenTable. You don't call restaurants and make reservations, hopefully. You go online and you book a table. There's about 1 billion truckloads in the US every year where 90% of them are scheduled by calling or emailing the warehouse or plant. So Velostix is providing an OpenTable-like experience for these schedulers so they can book these truck appointments at these docks. How did I get here? I founded a company called Chai One in 2008 in Houston, bootstrapped it. And over 15 years, we learned a lot about industrial problems, everything from plant operations, field operations, and supply chain. And that's where the idea of Velostix was born. And COVID was just a catalyst that was the right time to jump in. One question I'd have for the audience, how many founders in the room? How many investors? Perfect, thank you.
Great, well now that we're all introduced to each other, as you can see, we've got panelists, our founders across industries with different technologies and spaces, but as a lot of you in the room know, kind of the first challenge as a startup founder is establishing your product market fit. So that's where we're going to start today. Ted, what have you learned founding SecurityGate that really was crucial to establishing that product market fit?
Well, I think the first thing is product market fit, to me, is a never-ending challenge. You've got to keep asking yourself if this is the right product. You've got to keep looking at the market and see how it's responding. You got to be able to look at macroeconomic trends and micro within your individual industry. So I think it's an eternal journey, first off. I also think that establishing product market fit really unlocks the next scale of resource allocation. I look at resources as people, cash, and time, right? You've got a limited amount of each of them. And so, particularly at the early stages of any startup journey, whether you've got 10 to 20 million behind you because you've had 2 or 3 exits and the investors are very, very bullish on your ability to just figure it out, or if you are, rubbing pennies together and keeping your day job until you get some element of traction before you jump head first. Being able to make sure that the first version of your product that you put out can actually generate some revenue, and even really generate enough traction that you can go get more resources. That is a process that I think a lot of, I like the title of Demystifying, because I think that a lot of people have a very skewed understanding when they found a company of what that initial process is going to be like. For us, what we did is we spent almost 7 or 8 months without building the product, and we were burning cash, just making sure that we spent every single resource of personnel kind of connections that we had within the industry. We were both from my co-founder is in the room, Charisse. She and I both came from the energy industry, right? So we had founder market fit, understanding what there was out there to solve, but we weren't sure exactly how we wanted to solve it. So we had an Excel file, and we talked to every single enterprise customer or prospect that we could for almost 8 months. I think we had little tabs at the bottom for every company. We talked to McDonald's, we talked to Chevron, we talked to Verizon, we talked to a ton of middle-sized companies as well. And we just asked them 20, 30, 40 questions. And every single time that we got a little closer to understanding what most people were saying, yeah, that's also a problem here, we just started throwing stuff in front of them. Mm-hmm. Hey, look, is this how you would want to look at the UI, or like this? And so by the time we actually released our first product, we actually did so alongside a couple purchase orders. And then we used those purchase orders from enterprises to go back to the bank to leverage our first bank loan, which is a very non-standard way of funding your company. Why I think it's so important to walk very patiently down that initial phase instead of just jumping in with 15 coders is because the amount of resources it takes with 2 to 4 people versus 20, you're going to spend a lot more. And unless you're absolutely certain of what you're building will absolutely drive the revenue, it's an allocation of resources that is a little more risky. So that was kind of our path. I think it's different when you raise tons of capital out the gate. You can go in stealth, but hopefully that rings a bell with some of the different experiences other people are seeing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Simone, I know you've had a journey with Clutch to finding that product market fit. So what was your experience like?
My experience is I wish we did what Ted did. We did quite the opposite. I think we did build a product prior to really understanding our customer needs, and we pivoted about 3 times in order to actually achieve what I would call product market fit this year. I think product market fit is always a sliding scale, but we built an app, we launched at TSU in Houston, and we were like, yeah, everyone's gonna use this, it's gonna be amazing. And then nobody used it because it was an app built for college students to pay for things, and college students don't have any money. So we ended up having to pivot the idea to serve what we do now, which is really those emerging brands looking to work with college students and pay them for what their expertise is right in that social media space. So now we are working with more established brands. I think this year we've really started to see some real big traction and growth. So I think, I could get into the pivots. I think Natalie plans on asking me about some of that later, but it's definitely something I wish we had done, because I think, and I tell this to founders I talk to all the time, figuring out who your customer is and what their real problem is and testing that out with them is going to be way more important and save you a lot more time and money than just going out and building something and then trying to like force it on people. I think people will naturally inherit what you're doing because when you know what the problem is, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, Gaurav, with Velostix kind of emerging out of Chai One, you had a unique experience too with finding your product market fit, right?
Yeah, we did. I think one of the things that we tend to overlook is confirmation bias. So if you go ask a customer, what's your problem, they'll tell you exactly how they see it. It's our job to kind of look beyond that problem and look at what's actually happening on the ground. And so, we had some initial customers that very much were victims of whatever was happening in their space. And so look, this is a great idea. We'll pay you for this. Go build this. And we did. And then we realized that there weren't that many people that had the same problem. So we pivoted, early on and set this goal that we're going to go find 10 customers that will be raving fans of the product. That'll bring us the next 10 customers, and we will not change one thing about the product. Can we find 10 customers that want and need the exact same thing? And we found those 10 customers. In fact, we found 23 customers, and now we're in that trajectory where we feel like we do have product market fit.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, if you're playing some sort of startup bingo, this really is the panel for you because we've talked about product market fit, we've mentioned pivots already, and the next thing we're going to talk about is your business roadmap. So that's obviously something important and also something that's going to evolve as you grow your companies. But kind of let's talk about the day one of planning your roadmaps and then maybe how it's changed over the years. And Ted, we'll start again with you. What did you plan for Security Gate's path to commercialization and growth and what then actually happened?
Great question, a lot there. Because you got product roadmaps, you've got your marketing and sales roadmap. I think as a company, the first thing that we decided as a co-founding team is we took a look at our own skill sets. My co-founder was more on the product management side, really understood what the market needed, did a lot of market research. And me, I had previously run a few different companies in operations officer roles, so I figured I could handle all sales and marketing. And so we ended up putting all the resources that we had early on into the product and the dev team. And so our gamble there was we're always going to have a product that works. We don't have to have demos where you can't touch 17 buttons, right? So we always had a product that worked, and what starts to happen once you start to get some more cycles, you start to get some more customers, is I always imagined all the different, because I'm a visual person and I like racing, I always would imagine cars or horses on a racetrack together. You got marketing as one, you got sales as one, you have your HR as one, you have product and you have dev. And so what happens is, for us, our dev cycles started to really outpace sales and marketing because they were all resting on our shoulders and we didn't invest in sales and marketing. Looking back, every startup that I'm going to join or support, I will always say the opposite. Go focus on marketing first because it's way longer. It takes a lot more cycles to get your marketing brand, your overall brand, your thesis, to what they were saying earlier, trying to figure out exactly what the customers need the most. I think the best group to do that is marketing. And so, it really depends on how many resources you have. As we've grown the company, those kind of resources have all changed, right? So we've had to, when I look at the hiring roadmap, when I look at the budget allocation, it took us about 5 years to get to the point where all the different groups had a leader, all the different groups had enough, momentum underneath them that they could kind of work with each other. And at this phase, now it's about driving deep alignment without any founders in the room. How is product going to release that according to marketing? And how's marketing going to validate that product feature before it goes to dev? Well, how much money or resources does it cost to build that feature, and what's the sales pipeline map to that? I think the biggest challenge to an early stage founder is you have an idea about this alignment. You have an idea of how well your team should be working together. And then you really look at your budget and you're like, I don't have any of those people. I don't have any of those ways to visualize that, that connective tissue between the different groups. So how has the roadmap changed on hiring? We started with dev, then we built product, and then we tried a few cycles at sales and marketing, and it wasn't really till our third or fourth year till we really got all of them off the ground. I don't think there's a wrong answer. You could invest in all sales first, and I think there's pluses there. You can invest in all product first. There's pluses there too. I think the real thing you have to figure out is, where do you, no kidding, have your founding team and their skill sets are the strongest? Lean on that until you absolutely can no longer. And the longer that you do that, the more secure I think your program is going to be, because the founders are the ones who can make mental pivots really quickly, and then build staff behind them. And that's, of course, if you have generally limited resources. Mm-hmm. Very different approach if you're starting with a ton of cash up front.
Yeah. I'm going to start from like the point of view of like what your vision is for what you see your company achieving and doing in the next 10 years. And Madison and I started with a vision of empowering the next generation. And I think what that means can be very vague. So when you drill down into what we're doing, we wanted to empower the next generation of creators who are looking to live manageable lifestyles while also making money and kind of changing the way you look at having a career, right? Like what we thought of careers 10 years ago isn't what careers are going to look like 10 years from now. And so how do we build a foundational space for those types of freelancers and creators to come to be able to essentially do what you would be able to do when you have a career? So I think that like when we started with our journey, it started with an idea and it's turned into a vision now, and we've been able to come back to that every time we want to look at an experiment and like say, hey, what do creators need in order to be successful? And by creator, I mean right now it's content creator, short form video content, whatever you name it though. What do clients need to be successful? They need somebody to be able to work with for a long period of time. They need to be able to have sales metrics that tell them, hey, if I go viral in this video, this is how many sales I've generated because of working with this creator, right? So we look at what we're doing from the standpoint of how are we continuing to empower the next generation at every phase of what we're doing, and how do we set our people up for success. And I know it's more of like a flowery answer, but I think it really helps keep us grounded in what we're doing. In terms of like where we've decided to invest our money, honestly, it's all over the frickin' place. Like, as a founder, sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, and so it's hard for me to say like, yeah, definitively we've done this right thing right. We've always just gone with what we think is best for the people that we're trying to serve. So that's my answer.
Very mission-driven, Gaurav.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's quite interesting. You know, when you do a fundraise and you talk to investors, they'll care about the product, but they really care about is traction. They'll care about, talk to me about your sales motion, your sales pipeline, how many days it takes to close deals, how fast it's expanding. There's very little interest in like the detail about the product. And oftentimes as founders, we forget that. We focus so much on how cool this idea is in our head that we forget about the go-to-market. So we focused on the persona of the buyer a lot. So we said, okay, well, it's the logistics manager who's going to be buying this product, or a warehouse manager. This person is a non-sophisticated person. This person doesn't understand AI or machine learning or whatever cool stuff you're throwing at them. All they want to do is not have trucks show up late. So what can we do for them? And then we tested some things online. So we ran Google Ads, we did LinkedIn InMail, we did LinkedIn targeting, very simple messaging all around. Do you want to manage your labor costs better? Do you want to retain your workforce? Do you want to predict when trucks would arrive? And we found that very large companies, Fortune 50 companies that you would think would require big MSAs and large enterprise sales teams, actually these people would click on that ad, sign up for a demo, and buy the product in less than 15 days. Nobody would look at the MSA. It was incredible. And so we said, okay, can we just focus on this particular persona and deliver to them what they need? Not what our vision is, not what we want to do, but just right now, just give them what they want so that they can hit their KPIs for this quarter. And just by being hyper-focused on that persona, we uncovered a ton of value and a ton of problems for that particular business. Once we did that, we went to the next persona. So logistics manager was just all around scheduling, director supply chain, VP supply chain, they care more about analytics and KPIs, macro views about the business. So now we're building a roadmap in partnership with them. Again, very focused on what does it take for them to be promoted? What does it take for them to hit their internal pillars in their business? They don't care about your business. They care about themselves. So can we deliver to them what they need, and how do we bring that into our roadmap? And we do the work of tying that in terms of a long-term vision. So I would say just very, very much customer focused. And so for that purpose, we keep our development team very, very skinny. In fact, our development team reports into customer success. We don't really have a product or CTO function at all, because we want to respond very quickly to these customer problems.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I think we've talked a little bit about hiring and funding, and we're going to get to those topics more, but there is a very common experience with startup founders to go through a very scrappy phase, and some of y'all might be in the scrappy phase in this room today. So let's talk a little bit about kind of really making the most for what money you have kind of in the early stages, how to make the most out of your small team, kind of really talking about the resourcefulness and then also avoiding the burnout of that period. And so Simone, I want to start with you, if you could share your experience.
Yeah, so has anybody hired or decided to start working with anyone as a founder yet? Okay, a few of you guys. It's really interesting the way, I'm gonna talk about hiring because I think the way in which Madison and I went about the hiring process during the raise was very strategic and intentional. So when we started out 3 years ago, before we had actually raised any institutional capital, we had a family and friends round essentially, where we used the capital from them to hire a developer, and this is before we knew that starting with the product was not the right way to go. And we had actually hired them through a program at UC Davis. And UC Davis actually has a research-based class where you can hire college students as developers for free, and they get a credit for working with you for class. And you'd be surprised at how smart some of these developers are at these universities, and I think most universities have programs like this where they can work with a startup for free and they just get a credit. I think somewhere in Austin actually has a similar program. But that's where we started, and that developer is actually still with us today. Once the semester was over, we hired them for an internship, and from the internship, they wanted to stay for some reason. We were like, okay, you're taking a bet on us. His name is Alexi. And now he's working with us full time. But I think that was one of the first scrappy moves we made in terms of hiring, like looking for unique ways to pull people onto your team for what you're trying to build is always how Madison and I have looked at it. And from there on, we've hired people that we've worked with in the past. We've hired people through family and friends. And that, to me, is so interesting to talk about now because we've had zero turnover, meaning we haven't had anyone quit. We've actually only had to fire people. And I think that's because of how intentional we were when we decided we needed a developer on a team. We decided, okay, now it's time to hire somebody who can handle our marketing. Okay, now it's time to hire somebody who can liaison with our creators. And so we did that at a point in which she and I could no longer handle the burden or the load. It wasn't necessarily because we got all this money and we were like, okay, now time to spend it. No, we waited and we made sure that it was something that we were doing to fulfill a need. And so I think that like through that, we've also been very intentional about documentation, processes that we're building out for our company. So that way we don't, experience burnout, right? That's the other thing that we talk about as founders a lot. We intentionally told each other, I'm not working or talking to you about work on the weekends unless it's urgent. And then during the week, we made sure to be very intentional about the time we spent on Clutch. I also was working a full-time job and on Clutch for, I think, 6 to 8 months before I quit my job. And I would spend my time during my remote day halfway on Accenture and then halfway on Clutch. I don't know if I should tell you guys that, but right. It was what happened. And so I avoided having to sort of work super late nights because I was working remote. So the pandemic did sort of help with that as well. But those are some of the like strategic moves we made in order to like avoid burnout while also building what we have today.
Clutch was just your pro bono client.
Yeah, basically.
Gaurav, do you have any feedback on kind of your experience with maybe either avoiding the burnout and setting boundaries, or an example of your scrappiness?
Yeah, totally. I think a few years ago, so I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they're big into sports. My 6-year-old just started playing spring ball, and I mean, every time he hits the ball, you got to see the guy, and he's so excited, and there's just no way that I'm going to miss that, So I decided a few years ago that I'm just going to become very, very intentional with my time, and so if I can't achieve something in 40 hours a week, shame on me for taking 2 hours extra per day from their time. And so how do I make that happen? One of the things we did is we leverage the crowd a lot, meaning sites like Upwork, Catalent, any of these freelance websites. There's a lot of really good talent available around the world to do things. So we don't hire full-time people as much as we, unless we need to. Second is we use automation quite a bit. So just having done Chai One for many years, all our back office is completely automated. We don't have a CFO, we don't have a COO, we don't have outside of a part-time bookkeeper, everything runs just using software. That helps reduce costs quite a bit. And so I would say that if you can think about hiring, hire for sales first. Next, hire for strong tech talent. And third, hire for whatever you need, operationally or administratively.
Ted, what about you for SecurityGate? How have you been able to make the most with what you have?
Well, I have an interesting story. So my co-founder is my wife, and people, if there were a couple of years where we were like, don't tell anybody, and now I think it's probably one of the most impactful parts of our story, right? So she was managing cybersecurity budgets for major companies. I was at Shell doing audits. We had really great work-life balance, but both of us were a little unfulfilled, right? So I went and ran a couple other companies, sold one of them, still was unfulfilled. I said, well, she wanted to build a tech company, and I said, well, I'll be happy to help you. And then we just got into great teamwork when I was actually helping her drive product market fit for her first idea. So the reason I bring that up is because it was a very go big or go home excursion. It was really risky because if we both failed, we both had little kids. In the event that it worked out, it was because both of us were 1,000% dedicated. We kind of took an approach that even if the tech isn't perfect, even if the market falters a little bit, even if we screw up by making some mistakes, what's the one thing that we have always wished that we had? And it was a true story. The previous companies that I had been with, previous companies she had been with, the culture and the team were just not something to write home to mom about. And we naturally sort of fell into this agreement that SecurityGate had to be a place where people really enjoyed working, right? And so little by little by little, we've just continued to add to that. And so, our biggest value, I think, getting through multiple market downturns, getting through multiple challenges, getting through churn, getting through all these different phases, it had less to do with the fact that we were together. It had a lot more to do that we were extremely aligned on what we thought was the most important thing in the company. It wasn't how much investment we got. It wasn't even our product market fit. It was how well is this team able to work together and be aligned. So there's little things that we started to do. We got some gym equipment, and we took one of the offices, made a couple people work in co-working space. We built a gym. And then when we got to the point where we had enough pipeline and enough sales coming in, we started saying, well, what if we spent $200 a week on somebody who come in and worked out with these people like a coach. Then we spent like $300 a month on some food to have in the fridge. And then a lot of our team had kids. And we said, well, what if we spent $1,000 a week on a summer tutor? And so we created a place where for less than the cost of an employee full time, we've created a place where all the other employees absolutely love working. They love their life there. And so what we've actually been able to achieve from that is I think we've invested in the people first, and now they are ready for whatever challenge that we can throw at them. And we kind of believe in if 10,000 RPM is where you're about to burn out. We try to keep everybody right at 8 because we'd much rather have, instead of taking 3 weeks off and then burn it out for a sprint on 3 weeks, rather just keep everybody at 8,000 RPMs. And so the other thing that we've done is, because we were scrappy bootstrap founders, I wouldn't say it's a chip on the shoulder. It is a recognizable scar, right? You see people and you're like, yep, you've been through some stuff. I can recognize it as clear as day. And so what we actually looked for in interviewing is we started adding in a culture interview. And that culture interview has nothing to do with a job. It has nothing to do with your technical skill set. We ask questions like, why are you here? What's different about this job than the next? And what we actually found is the ideal employee that we're looking for is somebody who has been at a job and knows that he or she could do more. And that's why we call Security Gate, we call it internally Second Chance City, because we like hiring people that have a little bit of an angst that they want to move on and do something different, and they want to really establish themselves. So to me, how do you keep from getting burned out? Make sure you got great people. How do you make sure that you kind of keep that team growing? For us, it's been invest in the little tiny stuff. And that's, working for us right now.
Yeah, if company culture's on your bingo cards, you can now check that off. And the next one that you're going to want to check off is funding. But I think what we all were talking about before and in our initial Zoom meeting was less about funding and like the more traditional VC approach that a lot of startups do get to talk about and share their journey on, but more about responding to an economy when it constantly throws challenges at startup founders, and also just this idea that there's more out there than just VC investors. And I think we've got a unique panel to discuss that. But Gaurav, I wanted to start with you and share a little bit about how you've bootstrapped, you've raised, you've kind of done a little bit of everything. So yeah, what's been your experience?
Yeah, when I decided to go raise capital for Velostics, I just went and did some research on what are the benchmark trends, like how long does it take and stuff like that. And what I found was pretty shocking. It said it takes at least 6 months to raise capital. You got to pitch to over 200 different investors to get there. And I was like, I just talked about being intentional, with my time and seeing the kids play more sports. So that's not going to work. And so, I'll just share my experience. What I learned is a few things. One is, as a founder, every VC or investor is not equal. What does that mean? Some investors want to write checks of over $1 million and want to own at least 10% of your company. So if you're trying to raise $500,000, there's no point pitching to that particular VC. If you are at the angel route and you want to go raise $25,000 or $50,000, there's no point talking to a seed investor. The thing with the venture capital space is that they're looking for deals, right? So if you say, I'm looking for a certain type of check size, what kind of deals do you invest in? They're going to say, well, we invest in seed, Series A, Series B, which is pretty much everywhere. So you have to ask the question, well, tell me about your fund. What year are you in your fund? If they're past year 3, year 4 of their fund and haven't raised another fund, they're not going to write small checks. Why? Because they have to write follow-on checks that comes that they actually already invested in, right? So you have to look for investors that have, generally speaking, of course, things could always be different. What we found was that investors that have funds that are less than 3 years old are still writing new checks to new companies. So we would look for those. We would look for investors whose goals in terms of ownership of the company aligned with what we were trying to raise and the cap table the way we wanted to have it structured. Remember, everything I've said so far has nothing to do with your product, your company, your vision, your idea. Zero. It's all about the VC and how their business works. Remember, they're also in business to make money. So understanding their check size and ownership matters to you. Third, often found that founders will come to a meeting with a venture capitalist, whether it's a call, and just start pitching. Wait a minute, why don't you ask them first? Are they even investing? Who have they invested in? Can you talk to one of the founders they've invested with? How are they to work with? How are they on the board? This is somebody you're getting pretty much married to. So you need to be very careful about who you want to bring onto your cap table not all money is equal.
Yeah, Simone, for you, I know you've raised, but you've also been, I think this whole panel has been keenly watching what's happening with Silicon Valley Bank, but I just wonder what's your perspective on, having this money and then being able to, deploy it too.
Yeah, I just learned something from you. That was awesome. I wish, again, we were more strategically thinking about the way we, raised our pre-seed round, because we definitely were more bullish, just sort of like talking to anybody. And I think that's as a result of being a first-time founder, straight out of college, or I guess 3 years out of college. But in terms of what's happening now with, one, the market, and two, with Silicon Valley Bank, it's actually been very interesting, because when the recession was looming last year, we ended up actually raising our additional capital through institutional investors. And so that approach was actually super helpful for a number of reasons. You now have more institutional investment you can go back to. They might want a little bit of a bigger chunk than maybe a VC might. So those are you have to be able to negotiate that. But I think that was the approach we took during the looming recession, and even recently with the Silicon Valley Bank issue that I'm sure we've all heard about. We actually just had put some of our money in Silicon Valley Bank a week or two ago, right before everything happened. And so ironically, when it happened, I know today I think things are looking a little bit more positive, but my business partner and I were talking, and I was like, let's not put all of our eggs in that one basket. Let's keep some of our funds in our other account that's with a different bank, so that way we can make sure we have one account for just revenue and one account for payroll. And we had just so happened to put the amount that's FDIC insured, or up to FDIC insured, in Silicon Valley Bank. And so when we found everything out last Thursday or Friday, my fiance was the one that was actually FDIC insures up to $250,000. We were like, oh shit, oh, excuse me.
That's okay.
Right? That was our genuine reaction. We were like, oh, okay, we should be fine. But long story short, I think those are the kinds of things that happen as a founder, where you're just honestly, I don't even know what goes on in your brain during times like that. You're just out of it. You're on another planet sometimes, and you have to be able to come back and have those moments of okay, it's gonna be okay even though it's not okay. And that's a lot of times what we experience, not only with the Silicon Valley Bank issue, but also when raising. You're gonna get a lot of rejection. And I don't know if anybody knows the statistic, but only 2% of Black women, I think, have raised up to $1 million in venture capital, and I think that number was lower during the recession. So we've always just kept the mindset of we know what we're doing, we love what we're doing, we're gonna continue to keep working at it and focusing on our business, and race towards scalability, profitability, and whatever investor comes our way, we'll make sure that they're just as right a fit for us as we are for them, similar to.
Yeah, I think it's, at the end of the day, just a testament to the fragility of having a startup company. There's always something to challenge you, especially when it comes to having money to grow your business, right? So Ted, for your experience, what has it been maybe seeking other options, not just traditional VC investment, and kind of making the most with alternatives as well as institutional funding?
Yeah, I think that, so we had a unique path, right? So I had sold my equity in a separate company that I grew, and that really created some runway for me. And then I put some of my own money in, and then we went bank, and then we went angel, then we went seed again, and then we raised from institutional. To his point, I think it takes a couple cycles of being in that fundraising environment before you sort of realize, okay, this is a game. You have to understand what the VC wants to do. You have to understand whether they're a fit for you. I think the first time that I raised institutional, I probably spoke to 200 players, and about 10 of them understood our market. That's not a knock on them, it's a knock on me, right? Do we want to go to enterprise SaaS players who sell a lot of B2B? Why am I in front of B2C investors? Eventually, we just said, if they don't know industrials, we're probably not going to talk to them. And so it's taken, 4 years to do that. I think it's very important for startup founders to understand one very, very particular thing. If you're going to run a scalable business that requires more resources in the short term to scale up to reach either profitability or a traction point, you've got to choose between the two. You're either going to scale your company really quickly so that you don't need capital. That's a very cash flow intensive business, and it's hard to do in the enterprise world. It's hard to do as software. The alternative is that you are raising capital not to exit. You're not raising capital to win big. You have to be very myopic in understanding that you're raising capital to get to a certain level of traction so that you can attract the next level of investors who are going to try and take you to the next traction point. And as a first-time SaaS founder, it was very challenging for me to understand that, and it took a couple different cycles. Now what I tell people is I'm like, kind of take time and twist it and look at all the different milestones that you have to achieve, up and down, and then break all those milestones up into maybe 4 or 5 different groupings. And your only job is to get to the company in the next one. I look at them as kind of mountains, right? So I think that startup, this whole demystifying, I really like that word as a title, because the startup journey, you're probably going to have 6 or 7 mountains to climb. And most people spend too many resources on mountain 3, 4, and 5. And really, if you're going to raise $1 million, then, and I'm not going to do the backwards math right now, but we could. It's a very simple math. Let's assume everybody's going to take 20 to 30 points in a company. They're going to try to exit for 10 to 15 on 7 years. You start doing the math, you're like, wow, I need to be at this level of revenue by this time to match what that investor wanted. And when you can very clearly articulate the path to just get to that level, I think you're going to have better luck with the investment community, because it showcases an element of understanding, like, I'm laser focused on these 7 things, and if it's not part of that 7, we're not going to mess with it. That is where your efficiency of capital comes. And so I know a lot was said. Bottom line is, if you can use your own capital, if you can use seed funding, if you can use friends and family and angels, if you can use some sort of non-dilutive capacity to get to an element of traction that you can stand on and really say this matters, then I think you have a much better foundation to go to an institutional capital investor and say, hey man, I'm ready to put gas on this fire. Because there is a fire. It's not just an idea with a couple sticks. And I think that's the biggest problem that people have when they try to raise capital too early, is because they really don't have a fire yet,
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to invite questions from the audience after this next question I'm going to ask. So if you do have a question, we have a microphone right in front of me. But before we get to that, we've talked about funding, we've talked about hiring, we've talked about product market fit, so many elements of the startup journey. But each of you chose to do to take your startup journey from Houston, and we are at Houston House. So let's talk about the Houston factor of your companies. Gaurav, we'll start with you and just share a little bit about what the ecosystem, the role the ecosystem and the city as a whole has played to your company's success.
Yeah, it's how much time do we have?
16 minutes.
So I moved to Houston about 20 years ago, around actually in March of 2003 from Jersey. There was a blizzard at that time, and I came to Houston. Never been to Houston before, and I was working for this company, and they put me up in an apartment. There was a swimming pool, there were palm trees, and they had a washer dryer in the apartment. I was like, wow, what a concept! No state income tax. I mean, everything was just awesome. So 2 months later, I was living in Houston. Very quickly, I had reached out. I was 24 at the time, 44 now. Reached out to some people in real estate and other places in business, just asking to pick their brain, wanting to buy them breakfast. Not a single person said no. These are some of the biggest CEOs in Houston. And I was just blown away. This would never happen in New York. And then, a few years later, we bought a warehouse in East Downtown just to do Shark Tank, just to have fun. So we bought a warehouse, 5,000 square feet on Delano Street, and started buying beer and pizza for the startup community. And for 5 years, we did these demo days there. And the community came out, 120, 150 people every single month. And somebody sponsored beer and pizza every single month. We had the bathtub, which we call our beer tub, in the middle of the living room with ice in it, and we would put beer in it. And 60 companies pitched. 3 of them actually went to the Shark Tank show, the actual TV show. And we're in a deal with a few of them. What we found throughout this journey is, one, there's plenty of talent available in Houston. We met the smartest developers, designers, product managers that would come to these things. They just happen to work at large companies. You can't fault them for that. The large companies pay really, really well. There just was no density in Houston. There's no place people could all come together, it's a huge city, and say, this is where the magic happens. And that's what we were trying to create. And even to this day, we have people that attended those events 5-6 years ago that have massive companies in Houston now that go back and say, hey, if we can create density in Houston, then magic happens here.
Yeah, absolutely. And Simone, you have a unique experience in that you moved to Houston for your startup to join your co-founder.
Yes, actually my co-founder moved to Houston
to
join me, but you're
That's
good.
right.
You're good. It happens to us all the time. She moved to Houston actually to join the accelerator called Div Inc. It's an accelerator for diverse founders looking to, elevate their understanding of what it means to have a startup in the United States. We went through like a 12-week accelerator, and she actually quit her job to do that. But she had moved to Houston because she was convicted enough once we got into that accelerator to say, look, if we're gonna do this, we might as well just like take it home. So I was already here with my fiance, but once we went through the accelerator, that's when we started raising, and it was pivotal for us because that's when we learned what a pitch deck was, like how to financially model your company, how to get connected with VCs in the area. They have a partnership with Mercury Fund, which is I think one of the top VCs in Texas. So that was super pivotal for us in order to really understand like the gravity and the magnitude of what was possible. Then once we got out of that accelerator, we actually purchased an office in the Ion, which was also a huge step for us because that's where we were able to meet people like you guys and other startups in the Texas and Houston ecosystem, as well as people who could potentially help us with our launch, which is another way that Houston was really supportive. TSU was very supportive of our first launch, even though it was a completely different idea at the time. It's just been like milestone after milestone that we've had the opportunity to hit somewhere like Houston, and Houston's ecosystem is just a lot more supportive. And just like New York, in the Bay, I don't know if we would have had that same sort of support. So being in Houston has been really, really exciting and successful for us.
Yeah, Ted, if you can share your Houston angle, and then if anyone wants to come to ask a question, now's your time.
Cool. Houston is an awesome place to start a company. I think it's an awesome place to start a company in industrials, personally. That's where our fit was. It's the most diverse city in the country. You got tons of really big companies that are there, and one of the things that I think a couple of my fellow panelists would agree on is the number of major institutions that exist and their willingness, either through some of the ecosystem players or direct, they're willing to answer the phone. The biggest thing that I tell people is like, go get a couple proof of concepts started. Get something on paper that you're gonna work with this team, take that to the investment community. And I've seen in Houston a lot of companies do that. At our company, we didn't try to be ultra diverse, we just kept the door wide open. Right now we have, I think, 10 languages are spoke on our company, 60% women, 65% minorities. There's a ton of companies that exist in Houston, and there's a lot of people that want to get out of those big enterprises. And so in our world, you only need 2 out of 3 things to join the company. You either have to have operational technology, cybersecurity experience, which is unique. I'll leave it at that. Number 2 is you have to be from an industry, like industry, you have to be from chemical, you have to be something like that. Or number 3, you have to have been part of a high growth company. And if you have 2 out of those 3, that's where you can walk in the door. And for us, being focused on our ideal customer profile in industrials, being focused on bringing people in that have that level of experience but want to be part of a younger company, to us it's been a great catalyst for bringing in people. We're not short on good qualified people in the city. So, you know, I've had a great time there.
Great. Yes. Would you start us off with the Q&A portion?
Hello. Thank you so much for this amazing panel. I am Adela. I'm coming from Switzerland. I'm the founder of Algelio, the Tinder for companies. And I have a question about the hiring process. So in terms of compensation, I'm bootstrapped. We don't have a lot of cash. So my question is, do we offer sweet equity, salaries, the first salary, stock option? From your point of view, when we are starting, we don't have a lot of cash, what is the best way of compensating?
You want to go left
the
to right?
team?
For us, stock options would work for your first 10, right? And just make sure that your cap table doesn't get so expansive where everybody in the world has stock, because then it'll be really hard when you go and raise capital. But I think that once you get your first 3, 4, 5 core capabilities, whether it's tech, product, sales, I think you want to find people that want to be part of this journey long term, and the best way to kind of incentivize them is stock options, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say for us, we definitely don't start off hiring anyone full time. I think we start with like a contractor just to see how they'll work out. And we work with them for at least 3 months before we even consider part-time or full-time hiring. I also know, like I mentioned before, there are programs out there where you can work with like MBA or college students for free, and they'll do your market research, or they'll, you know, help you develop your product. Those are good avenues to at least start with to kind of get your feet wet with hiring or working with another employee. But those are kind of the two avenues outside of offering equity to employees if you are bootstrapped and wanting to be resourceful with your money.
Yeah, I mean, I would say my experience is don't be afraid to sell some consulting in the beginning.
100%.
You know, so like you need to bring in some revenue, right? Bottom line. We never gave any stock options to people because they were worth nothing, right? In the beginning. So we just said, look, we'll pay you, but we can't pay you as much, but we'll treat you better and we'll give you, you know, more flexibility. So, which I won in 2008. We hired some people that had been working for consulting firms. They were traveling every week, 4 days a week. We said, look, we'll match your salary, but you will never have to travel. Oh, by the way, there's a ping pong table, which back then was cool, right? Not so much anymore. And we'll have like, you know, Xboxes in the office, whatnot. And so for a lot of those people, like that was a meaningful difference in what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And they took pay cuts to come work with us. And they were very passionate about building something from scratch. They loved the fact that we built IKEA tables like in our office. Like that was a huge deal for them. Very different than, you know, staying at the Ritz-Carlton and consulting, right? Mm-hmm. So consulting and selling some services is a great to get some cash flow going. And then everything else the panelists said, you know, you can offer that too.
I'd add one thing to that. I love the idea of bringing in services early, right? Because you generate some cash, you're able to cycle some money through the company. The other thing is hire like whatever level of experience you think you need, go 2 or 3 levels above and find a way to pay that person. Because as long as that person isn't too focused on like, well, this is how it is at enterprise. If they're really wanting to be part of a smaller company, I've always been shocked at how much the company will transform when you really do bring in a heavy hitter for that domain expertise. The other thing that has worked really well, one of my VCs taught me this, is when you bring somebody into an early stage company, especially if they've been at a big company or they've been getting paid a lot more, help them with clarity understand the next 3 roles. And so the last like 4 people that I've hired in manager positions, I've told them, I said, you're gonna come in here. But when we hit these milestones, and these are the things you gotta do to hit that, you've got this job, this job, this job. Your team can grow A, B, or C. And so when that's a really big moment where it's more than just the ping pong table, it's more than just not traveling. They actually get to be put in the driver's seat or the co-pilot seat of their future. To me, that's been a really catalyst for people saying, nope, I want to be here. Because they become part of that journey and they feel like they have ownership in their future. That's what people want when they get into a small company. They just don't know it yet because they haven't felt it. Yep. Make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you so much.
Awesome. I think we have time for 1, maybe 2 more.
I just wanted to follow up on something you just asked about, or mentioned about enterprise sales, because I run a startup accelerator in a small town in Wisconsin, and I've actually had companies say, we hired a salesperson, but they only know enterprise, and here's this new product, and they were just lost. So talk a little bit about that process here, because that person might be having to figure out the whole sales process right from the beginning for them. What advice would you give to somebody who has to hire an enterprise salesperson to basically sell for a startup?
Well, I think if you're I'll speak very quickly. So how many times have you scaled a product that is at the level of maturity that we are? How many times have you actually been on a team that has actually grown? Big problem when you see somebody that has been part of really big companies, making the assumption that just because Johnny wants to be in a small company, that Johnny knows how to operate in a small company. I think that's the founders or the CEO's toughest job, is to make that correlation. And the best way that I did it is, show me, well, how much was your pipeline? Well, how much did you actually grow? Well, what was the pressure? Did you have to present to a board? Who was your boss? Like actually try to push them to tell you that they really do have the tactical experience of being in a company this size. It's a huge, I've missed a couple times on hiring just because of that. So I'm happy to chat later about it, sir.
Thank you all so much. I work for a nonprofit in sustainability. And a lot of the companies I work with are tech, high growth, also very large, established companies. So I'm trying to better understand the startup journey. And to get a sense, I guess my question is twofold. From the founder's perspective, at what point do you see environmental, social, governance, sustainability elements being opportunities and risks in that journey? And then at what point in the conversations with investors, VCs, are you getting questions about that? And from your employees as well, different stakeholders with different expectations about opportunities and risks related to sustainability and how it could help grow your business and elements in that regard.
Yeah, I can take that if you like. To start, so I think from a investor perspective, zero. Nobody cares about that yet, that we've spoken with. I think from a opportunity perspective, huge. So almost every customer that we're talking to wants to say something to the street about what they're doing with ESG, and so carbon footprinting, any kind of tracking of emissions data, scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions data, all that is really important. You have to find the right person in the organization that really cares about that. Generally, I would say if you can find the head of business from a commercial perspective, they're the best because they're selling to their customers and they need a story that they can go sell. So they're the ones that will sponsor the actual project to pay for whatever you're offering.
I think if the startup has a mission, right, associated with that, that's an easy win. But I'm kind of with him. If the P&L is not driving somewhere between, I don't know, 75 or 100 mil or above, chances are they're not going to allocate resources to have somebody on the staff dedicated to that. And then you probably don't want to have a relationship with a company that has one person. You're going to want to have a company that has an entire department focused on that, which makes it kind of an initiative at the strategic level. So I would probably go and check the companies and look at the board level initiatives. Ask that question first, and if it's in there, that's your ideal customer, right? But probably much, much bigger of a company.
I agree.
All right, well, thank you for those questions from the audience, and thank you to each of my panelists. This was a lovely discussion. I hope it was helpful to everyone in the audience. It was definitely enlightening for me, and I've already talked to each of you before, and I learned new things, so I think that's a good testament to a panel. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.